Hambini fans, and welcome to today's episode of the Shite and Sarcasm Engineering Show with a smattering of engineering and lots of shite. In today's episode, all the way from Ehrenfeld, Cologne, Western Germany, well, that's where it was built, is my Winspace T1500 superbike, hyperbike, wanker bike, whatever you want to call it. It's a bike. Gets from A to B. Welcome to the jerk shop. Let's dive in. Yes, let's dive in. Right, this is the T1500, and if I start at the front of this bike, I mean, it is just the shizzle, really. The whole thing was purchased by me, so I didn't get it for free. So it is as honest a review as you're going to get. The bike is the rim brake model. So if we start at the front or back, I suppose we better start with what you get. You get the frame, you get the handlebars, and you get the seat post. Everything else is bolted on. So you can see my crap bicycle mechanics. I'm not a Cytec trained mechanic, so I've left this slightly long because, mainly because when I built it, I didn't have the little stop end, so I left it a bit long because I thought they might fray. Onto it, I mean, we're not really talking about the bike here, but it's got some Winspace Hyper 65 wheels. The frame's a rim brake model and it's got direct mount rim brakes, so these bolt on two sides there and there. No real issues with that. This bike has the handlebars that came with it. These are quite good handlebars, I must be honest. I wasn't sure if I'd get along with these because these are like an aero profile, but I carried on the rim tape all the way around. I wasn't sure if I could just grab hold of them, but I could, so that's quite good. I tend to hold them in there, so if I use my left hand, I tend to hold it like that, or like that if I'm braking, or most of the time there, which is on the drops. Mount also comes with a bike, and then you can put GoPro on the front, or what I use it for is the light. This particular frame is not internally routed, so you have to run the brake cables and things outside. From here onwards, it's routed internally, but at the handlebars, it doesn't come through there. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing, considering the number of insurance claims I have to get involved with for people who break their handlebars. I've got a few spaces underneath. Now, in reality, I could have actually gone a bit lower than that. Maybe I could have actually gone straight to the deck and slammed the stem, but I didn't, because the geometry of this bike is a bit... Well, it's not like most bikes. The top tube is extremely long, so you end up with a fairly short stem, and you've also got a decent rake on the head tube. So the handling is like very, very direct. You just turn the bike and it just responds very quickly. It's not very docile. And that really just comes from the geometry and also the stem length. Like on my time, the stem's much longer. Back with having a short stem it was my choice, but I've also got very deep wheels on the bike. When it's windy, it becomes very twitchy, so that's good for, you know, working those bum muscles. We have the ubiquitous fluoro-coloured water bottle holder. Here is the Cell SMP saddle. I mean, I've had that for years. It just fits my balls and my knob well. Get my knob in between the gap, the big bit of the gap, by the way. And the adjustment is, I think it's like a Ritchie WCS clamp. In with the stuff that you get everything. So you get one for steel rails and carbon rails, all of that good stuff. The adjustment for the seat post, so you can raise and lower it, is here. But it just works, there's no real issues around that. And there's a little rubber grommet that goes around it so you don't get crap falling in between. This bike's set up with Di2, but again, in the fixtures and fittings box, you get the stuff to run gears, gear cables, if you require. That cover would come off, and a replacement one will go in that feeds your wires through. Di2 front mech, the wire comes through there, and there's a little grommet through there. The junction box is behind. It is BB86 bottom bracket. Check out my other video, and I'll show you the install of that. Now, the snobs amongst you are probably wondering why I've got Shimano 105 cranks on this bike and not Dura Ace. Well, let me show you why. So this is my Skylon complete with
Dura Ace, I think it's 9100 cranks. So let's just press on here. Ah, look at that, it's split. That is the 4th time I've had one of these split. And it's just getting ridiculous. And it's because it's bonded. Or, as I like to say, glued. This is underneath the bike, so that's where the rear brake goes. And you can see it's covered in crap. And that is probably the biggest drawback of this bike, which is the positioning of the rear brake caliper, and moreover the fact that I A, don't clean it, and B, just ride through crap. The other drawback, I guess, is probably not a criticism of Winspace, but of Shimano, who designed this fucking standard, is the clearance between the brake and, if you've got a power meter, or in my case it's the pedal speed sensor, cadence sensor, the clearance is not very much. So I used to have the cadence sensor a bit closer to the centre, but because of where that brake mount sticks out, I've had to move it slightly. It's not a showstopper, it's certainly not the end of the world, but some of these things, like the Stages cranks, may actually foul on that caliper. So better check before you go and buy it. So my front crank is a 53 and the smaller rings are 39. Or was it 52 and 39? I can't remember. It's not that important. And the rear is an 1128. Or was it 1228? I'm not quite sure. Again, I mean, I probably only use about 3 or 4 gears on here. I rarely use that one, and I rarely use these ones down here because I'm just not fit enough. This just works. There's no real issues with that. The alignment across the bike frame is cock on. Now, when you buy a Skylon, it comes with a very nice box. It's actually a fabric box with all the stuff in it. With the Winspace, it comes in cardboard, which to some people, they like that kind of thing or they despise it. To me, I'm a functional person, so all I care about is getting the bits. And the thing I really like about this is you get everything. So you get all manner of fixtures, fittings, spacers, everything. You don't have to go and spend another 150 quid getting a Di2 kit for that bike, whereas on this it comes with all of it. You don't have to worry about it. It's just buy the bike, handlebars, I got it with the handlebars. It's a complete bike, just add the group set and the seat. That's all you really got to do. But when I say you get everything, what I've done here is I've taken the seat post out and it shows you the Di2 battery holder, which is very slick, and that is the seat post wedge. Now this bike is touted as an aero bike, and I'll come to the testing in a minute, but some of the features on here that you probably aren't, it's not so clear in their marketing, I guess, is the fork is very, very narrow through the centre, so it's almost like a blade. That's a good thing. You've also got this sort of sculptured steerer assembly, so it sculpts into the down tube, so that's quite good as well. Structurally, one of the drawbacks that you have if you go for a full teardrop is it makes it structurally weaker, because the second motor area of something like a NACA aerofoil is not that great. On here, they've cut off the back. I wouldn't say that's a camtail per se, but it is, it's not tapering away to nothing, and it's the same along here. If you're going to go for ultimate aero, these days the UCI rules have relaxed, so you can actually make that bit a bit bigger. The areas that could be improved is you could have a scalloped down tube, so the gap between the front tyre and the down tube could be reduced, and that's this gap in here. Seat tube on this bike is scalloped, so you've got the cutout there. I mean, ideally you want to have that gap as small as you can, but the drawback is if you do that, then any crap that gets onto here will damage your bike frame. My Cervelo used to have a very small gap, it was maybe only 2 or 3 millimeters. The modern trait is to have drop seat stays, and this is like a T-shaped profile that comes along here. If this bike was in a wind tunnel with no rider on it, that would be extremely effective. As soon as you plonk the rider on, his legs are basically in this position here, and the effect of that becomes diminished. So in the foreground is my Skylon, and behind it is the Winspace T1500.
what I've done is I've lined up the brake hoods as close to where I hold them as I could, give or take a little bit. I mean, I could adjust with the spacers, but what's immediately apparent is the stem length. So on the Skylon, it's much longer than on the Winspace. The seats are almost identical, well, they're give or take a little bit in the same position. It is quite, I guess, misleading when you look at the two bikes, because the Skylon looks like proportionally, I'd say, a bit more laid out, whereas the Winspace looks a lot more compact, even though you've got that short headset tube. And it's mainly to do with this angle here. So its steepness or acuteness will vary, and that'll depend, it will affect greatly how the bike handles. There's also an issue with aero testing, and one of the reasons why I hate aero testing bikes, because to achieve the same position is virtually impossible. The handlebar geometry is subtly different, so you'd hold the handlebars slightly differently in both cases. So I've been using the T1500 for racing, and I haven't raced it for, well, I haven't been racing for a while, but I took it up again just for the sake of it. But today I'm just on a normal ride. I mean, the staggering, not really staggering, but the thing you'll instantly notice about this is it is absolutely razor sharp. I mean, it's set up to be hard. The wheels are very, very stiff. The frame itself is also very stiff. Right, it is that time of the show again. It is time for PowerPoint in today's edition of Execution by PowerPoint. First, we must check the pen is working. Oh, the pen is working, and if you are new here, that is a childish prank and a play on penis. Anyway, we carry on. Here's the title slide. I couldn't really think of much else to say about it because it's quite good. And most in here tune in to watch me ream the fuck out of something. It'd be more like tuning in to watch Sandra Bullock on Speed 2 and getting Thomas the Tank Engine, wanky tank. Anyway, remember to hit me up on Patreon, and also the website has had some major upgrades in the past few days due to me getting more hits. Mainly from hairdressers, ironically. Right. By Hambini H5, that merch will be going live imminently. I've sorted out a supplier in Manchester. Right, the build cost. This is how much the bike owes me. It's not down to the last cent because I'm an engineer and only works for plus or minus 20%. Well, that was what my 12-inch, or was it centimetre Winnebago tells me. Anyway. Right, there are a load of hidden expenses that you usually get in most bills that you don't get on this bike, and that mainly revolves around the handlebars and additional fixing kit, like adapters, hold the Di2 boxes in, or some little adapter, this here, there, everywhere. On this, you get everything. I mean, the only thing I would probably say is the wheels are a set of Hyper 65s. Normally I stick to 50s. But this bike, and me in particular, benefit from the 65, which is something I'll come on to shortly. It is $4,500 all in. Right, I need to say something about geometry, and it really needs its own slide because there is scope for a fuck up. The geometry on this bike results in what I would consider to be quite a long, effective top tube, especially if you get the size that I did. So end up with a shorter, effective stem length. The steering control on the front of bikes, you can almost consider it to be a rudder. So you get either dampened handling by having a long stem, or nimble handling by having a shorter stem. This bike is definitely the latter. I would also point out that if you're really tall, you may not be able to get a bike that fits. This is the Winspace website. It shows all of the possible permutations and things that you could get on the bike. I mean, the bike does come in a few different flavours, so you can get disc brake, rim brake, variety of colours. Scrolling down, you can see all sorts of the marketing and also the geometry. One of the key things to take away around this is about the scaling. and if you are in desperate need of aerodynamic supremacy. Here's a side shot of my bike and some of the aero features on it. Now, at this point in time, the UCI rules are fairly restrictive, and short of making the tubes having long caudal lengths, there's not really much that can be done. So going from the front of the bike, you've got the fork, which is very slightly flared, but you can't see it from that angle. The handlebars have a very flat top section, so that'll be that bit where you know you can hold it. And normally I'd whinge like a bitch because you're not able to mount anything onto them, but they're kind of taking care of that by integrating a speed and a light mount onto it. Now the head tube is quite long, so you will get a bit of a benefit from there, and then you have the mass vacuum of this, which is the middle of the front triangle, and it looks more like a trapezoid. Out the back you've got the drop seat stays. If you want to go like, for the quick wins, the easiest way to improve the quick wins or get the quick wins are, first of all, hiding the cables. That'll save a smidgen. It does cause a pain in the backside routing them. Reducing the gap between the down tube and the front tyre. Now I would point out this philosophy is disputed by some people purporting to be aerodynamic experts with sports scientist degrees and actual chartered recognised engineers who tend to take a different view. You'll know which side of the fence I sit on. Anyway, the same thing applies to the gap between the back wheel and the seat tube. Now, it's only fair for me to say that these gaps are largely there due to the use of fatter tyres, which I haven't used because I'm not stupid enough or brainwashed enough to run 30mm tyres on this bike. I'm often asked why I don't publish drag numbers for bikes and limit myself to wheels. The answer is fairly straightforward, and it's to do with bike sizing. Bike wheels are all roughly the same dimension, 700 by 22 or 622 by 22, whatever the size is. So the assessment of performance is comparatively straightforward. Few variables are changing. In the case of a bike frame, this gets thrown out the window. I've highlighted some features which are aerodynamic, but the overall amount of drag and ultimate performance is heavily dictated by variables which are unrelated to the bike itself. And that is mainly to do with the sizing. So these two Winspace bikes are the same T1500 in rim brake, but there are some differences that would make any mention of a drag number completely inaccurate. An obvious difference is the mounting position of the dropped stays. So here and here. So on my bike, this one, it is above the top of the rear tyre. On this bike, so this chap's probably a little bit shorter, you can see it's way below. Another one is the trapezoidal shape that I mentioned. On the smaller bike, you can see it's a clear triangle. And also it appears the angle of the top tube is more down than on this one. Now those kind of differences are like night and day, so blatantly saying one bike is faster than the other is bullshit. Now in reality, depending on how you fit on the bike, you will find one particular setup is more aerodynamic than the other. This is a piece of software that I derived over many years of data points. A more advanced version of this is used by some bike teams to do wheel choices for stage races, bike fit, and a few of the wheel companies also use this. Some arsehole also offered to get into partnership about an app so any random punter could use it, but they haven't fucking paid me, so I might just release it as it is. Normally, the usual fucktard sports scientists analyse the airflow going around the bike via CFD. This is rarely accurate. when the airflow is messed up. So CFDs reliant on boundary conditions and variable boundary conditions are notorious for producing scenarios which do not solve. This program uses empirical data to model the pressure points around the frame. So rider and other geometry to do the drag. Now, each point has an influence on another point. So essentially you work from right to left and keep the spot parameters above critical thresholds and thus avoid detachment. And that's why I was on about the wheels. Anyway, in this case, I put my lower half in because the top half of me is what it is. And those numbers are fairly constant because, you know, those parts of me aren't moving. So if I hit run, so you can see this. This is a model of my pedaling action, and the Winspace T1500 is represented as a stick frame. So it may look a little bit off because the tubes don't have any depth. I would emphasize the calculation in the background has been well and truly checked. The visualization is something that I've cobbled together so you can see it. Now, there are all sorts of variables that you can change. So you can change your femur length, lower leg length, crank arm length, and you see I've got quite long legs. And the one thing that stuck out on this bike was my choice of wheels. So the Winspace 65 is much better at mitigating the front tyre gap than the 50s, and it's to do with basically the speed of exit. And you can see that on here when you do it, and also it's basically been validated. The power changes as you go through the pedal strokes. So you can see the number changing, and speed is meant. You'll also find, as your cadence changes, your drag number will also change, the peak drag. And the key takeaway is there is unlikely to be one size of frame that is the fastest for everybody. However, you can look for some features that will help, like the aero hugging down tube and the lack of gaps, all those kind of things. They're not so much frame specific, but if you've got someone who's 6'5", they might find the Winspace, well, it probably doesn't fit them, but the Winspace T1500 might be the fastest, and then consequently someone who's 5 feet might find the Cervelo S5 is the fastest. It is that kind of thing. But I mean, if you just change some of the features, like how far of a toe overlap you've got over the back wheel, you can completely change the position of one bike to another. So that's where it is. Here are some shots of the interior of the frame. It's all very clean. There are some lines from me drawing the camera up and down, and also some seam lines. But I mean, that's camera line. And that's really it. So you can see the camera draw lines here. And also here. There's no real voids, no tenting, nothing. Geometrically very good. Right, negatives. These all revolve around the rear brake. There isn't really much I can add to this other than the last statement, get the fucking disc, if you're not worried about the drag. Things to consider. Now, the geometry does change as you get bigger, so take a look to see where you'll fit. My general guidance is to get the smallest frame that you will fit on and not overload the components, i.e. the number of spaces under the stem. Now, I've already mentioned the rear brake, and that's something that really can piss you off if you get loads of mud and crap in it. And then the topic of large format axles. The bike uses a BB86 bottom bracket that has a full length carbon seat. That setup is quite rare. Probably only 10 or 20% of bikes have that. If you go and fit a dub axle in there, you are probably asking for trouble. This is a fairly in-depth article on why fitting a dub or 30mm axle into a BB86 shell is ill-advised. You can obviously do what you want, but I certainly wouldn't recommend you do it. It mainly revolves around overload and flex. Many people have accused me of shilling Chinese products. Wake up and smell the coffee. Those Specialized and Canyons are all made in China. The only difference is they have a much more mature marketing department, as they've been doing it for years, and they also don't have the drawback of being a Chinese company. The mainstream cycling media have been the lapdogs of those Western brands for years, but those times are changing. Now, in terms of engineering, these guys, Winspace and the others, are effectively the OEM, so you're going back to the original person who made it, so their engineering cannot really be any worse. And as I've said before, in cycling, the price does not correlate with quality. This bike is probably not the complete package just yet. It doesn't have any engineering or manufacturing deficiencies, but there are loads of people that want a brand name, and it doesn't have that yet. But it will come. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you did enjoy it, remember to smash that like button. If you didn't, go screw yourself. And as always, keep banging your hairdresser.